Sometimes it's only after unspeakable tragedies occur that laws are passed aimed at protecting children, like little 5-year-old Talia Williams. The brutal torture that Talia Williams was forced to endure in her young life is enough to sicken any decent person. The almost daily punches and whippings over 7 months finally killed her on July 16, 2005. The fact that it came at the hands of her own father and stepmother is beyond heinous. They are now in prison, he for life. A federal court found him guilty of 2 counts of capital murder in Hawaii's first death penalty trial since statehood. Delilah Williams is serving 20 years for Talia's murder. In this insider-exclusive network TV special, Death in Hawaiian Paradise, Talia's Law, our news team is on location in Honolulu meeting with Mark Davis, partner at Davis Levin Livingston, who successfully represented Talia's mother, Tasha Hampton, and Talia's estate, and to discuss the specific legal challenges and strategies to win this case and pass this new legislation. As a result of this case, Mark Davis and Hawaii's congressional delegation urged new legislation, Talia's Law, to require mandatory reporters on all U.S. military bases to report immediately any suspicions of abuse to the relevant state's child welfare agency. Talia's case made it alarmingly clear that the military failed her with a mind-boggling laxity when it came to reporting and intervention. Time and time, red flags that could have, should have spurred help were ignored or dropped. Talia's autopsy report stated that she suffered battered child syndrome. It was this glaring lack of response and help for Talia that resulted in a $2 million settlement by the U.S. government with Talia's mother, Tasha Hampton, and Talia's estate for negligence and wrongful death. Talia's Law, introduced by U.S. Representative Tulsi Gabbard, requires the military to report any abuse on base to civilian authorities. The system needed to change.
Mr. Speaker, in 2005, 5-year-old Talia Williams was beaten to death by her own father, who was stationed at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii at the time. Talia suffered through months and months of abuse from her father and her stepmother, which ultimately led to her death. Why didn't someone do something? Why was this allowed? There were multiple reports that were made to military officials, but when it came right down to it, nothing was done to take Talia out of harm's way. I'm rising today to ask my colleagues to support my bill, H.R. 3894, Talia's Law, because more than 10 years after Talia's tragic death, the same gaps in the military's reporting requirements that failed to protect Talia remain unchanged.
On December 27, 2016, President Obama signed Talia's Law, aimed at protecting children on military bases. Mark has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Hawaii and across the United States. Mark has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. And his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Honolulu, Hawaii. It is my great pleasure to introduce Mark Davis to the show. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm, what type of law you practice, a little bit about yourself.
The firm was founded 40 years ago, a little over 40 years ago. All 4 of the founding partners had come from public interest backgrounds. I was a civil rights lawyer with the ACLU. Another partner was with Legal Services. Another partner was with National Prison Project for ACLU, and another one was executive director of Common Cause. So we all had this experience of, using litigation for the public interest. And when we decided to move into private practice and handle private cases, we always felt that it was important for us to continue to maintain some of our public interest work. So we continuously have a group of civil rights cases and public interest cases that we pursue. And more so, we have tried to select the cases that we've handled over the course of 4 decades to cases that might have an impact to change the way things are. And that's one of the big issues that we have felt has been so important in the tort world, is that you're able to perhaps make a difference with regard to how issues with regard to safety and medical practice and so on may be changed permanently. And that's been, I mean, personally for me, one of the more satisfying aspects of practicing law is the idea that what we do we're invested in because we feel it's important and has an opportunity to change.
I understand also that one of the organizations that you were the president of before, and the only member, by the way, of the bar from the state of Hawaii, was the Inner Circle of Advocates,
That's
right?
correct.
What do they do, by the way?
So this is a group of, I think, who are probably the top plaintiffs' lawyers in the country, some of whom are civil rights lawyers, some of whom do all sorts of work. But they are lawyers that are not litigators in the sense that they never go to court, but these are trial lawyers, the people who really, make their living inside the courtroom. And it's a collective group in which we, share strategies and ideas and also friendships. There are the people in this group that are some of my closest friends, people that I would do anything for, they would do anything for me. And we are constantly consulting on how to do a better job, how to hone our skills. And that's kind of the meat of the issue. It's not a political organization. It's all about, improving your lawyering skills. And it's been a great honor to serve that organization as president and to, as of today, continue to be an active member.
Okay. Today we are here on a case that did change the law, and it's the case of Talia Williams. Tell our audience who Talia was.
Talia Williams was a 5-year-old girl who, through in July of 2005, it was discovered that she had been, the custody had been transferred to her natural father, with whom she had had very little prior contact. And over the course of time, he abused her, he tortured her, and he ultimately murdered her.
This was during a period of only 7 months, right?
Correct. It was a relatively short period of time.
And right here in Hawaii.
Yeah, it happened here in Hawaii. He was a military enlisted man. He had married another woman who was in the household. And when the news broke about what this poor little girl had suffered, I've never seen a case that shocked the conscience of this community, not only the courts, but just all over the newspapers. And it was so extraordinarily brutal how he treated this child and how he ultimately murdered her, that he was prosecuted on a capital murder crime, the first one since statehood. So there has been very, very few cases, of course, since statehood that there's been any death penalty prosecution, but this was one of them. And every day, the newspapers were filled of the, horrible details of what this man had done to this poor little girl. And so that's the context in which we ultimately got involved. And what we learned over the course of our working on the case was that her screams were and cries for pain were heard by neighbors, and military police were called, and military interveners were called, and he was brought up on staff charges, and the child was taken to Schofield Barrack Medical Facility to deal with some of her bruises and physical injuries. And she, even at 5 years old, even reported to the physician that this had been inflicted by her father. And the doctor decided that there was no child abuse. And so when ultimately a family member got wind of what was going on, they immediately called the state Child Protective Service, which was the only entity that had the ability to remove the child from the household and take actions to protect the child, whereas the military system was completely designed to give punishment to the abuser. And that's the way the two systems were worked. So when ultimately the state authorities were contacted, they had no record of this, even though there had been multiple reports of potential abuse.
It's like two parallel universes, right? One's the military, the other's the civilian, and they were not coordinating with each other, right?
Correct. And I think their defense, when we ultimately sued them, the government, for not taking action to intervene, was that we did everything the regulations required us to do. We reported it to his command punished him, but nobody was taking any actions to protect the child. And that's what the state authorities did. And there was simply no way that the state authorities were notified about the situation that was going on. And that's the thing that when we became involved in the case, we determined had to be changed.
Right, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but in 2016, a new law was passed called Talia's Law. Right. We'll get into that in a minute, but I would like you to talk about some of the legal challenges your firm faced in suing the government.
Well, to begin with, the federal government is generally immune from acts of its employees that are intentional attacks. So if and the claim was, of course, if the father had murdered somebody, then the government can't be held liable for these intentional acts of the father. And that was one of the very basic things. And more so in terms of the way they responded to the abuse, the reports was, here are the military regulations, here is what we were required to do, which was report to the command, to call the MPs, and that they said they did. The problem was that when they were called out to intervene, even though they found the child injured, naked, locked in a room with their own feces, they felt that they could not take any action to remove the child from the situation.
What kind of crazy thinking is that?
It is bureaucratic gobbledygook, and it just makes no sense when you step back and look at it. And yet that was, the defense, that we did everything we were supposed to do. And
so this was when you filed the lawsuit,
right
before you even went to trial. It was challenged on those grounds.
Right.
What was the end result? How did the judge allow this to go forward?
I think that the judge, although they acknowledged what the existing law was for the government in terms of their responding to these types of things, which would have otherwise, allowed them to walk from any liability in this case, nonetheless recognized that because the military had established a system to deal with child abuse, because there is a federal child abuse statute, they just lack the authority to remove a child and protect the child, that they had assumed a responsibility which the federal judge determined, may have been violated and would not have existed but for the fact that they set up this alternative system which kind of competed with the state system.
You had some expert testimony in a particular doctor, Dr. Sharon Cooper.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what she reported.
Well, Dr. Cooper was, of course, there was a statute in effect that required physicians and everyone to report child abuse. But for some reason, many of the federal authorities thought it didn't necessarily apply to them. So Dr. Cooper, kind of examined the very core of the nature of child abuse as an endemic problem that exists within our community, and explained how social service agencies, whether they be state, federal, or others, had an obligation under their professional standards to intervene. And it's always centered on protecting the child, not necessarily punishing the wrongdoer, which should be a secondary issue. So, she was very, very strong in terms of criticizing the government in the fact that the safety of the child didn't seem to be a priority, and that's what should have directed all of their efforts.
Yeah, it's almost like people lost sight of what this case is all about.
Exactly.
5-year-old girl is dead. Maybe somebody followed regulations, maybe they didn't, but someone's dead, and that's what should be focused on. You did a great job. What were some of the hurdles that she had in this case?
First of all, there was, our entire civil claim was halted while there was the pending federal case. And of course, none of the major players like the father or the stepmother could be deposed by virtue of the fact that they asserted their Fifth Amendment rights. And the mother was living, the natural mother, my client, was living on the mainland. And so the whole case was stymied for literally years and years, because, as you can imagine, in a death penalty prosecution, especially one that is as rare as this one was, because we hadn't had one literally since before statehood, the entire system stopped. And likewise, the production of the documents that you would typically review with regard to reports and investigations and so on were all blocked by virtue of the fact that they were, very, very concerned about protecting the constitutional rights of the criminally accused. And so all of those things were kind of difficult hurdles that we had to get around, and certainly just have to kind of wait until the prosecution was concluded.
Sure. How long did it take to prosecute criminally?
It took literally years. The stepmother pled guilty.
Testified against her.
And testified against her husband. And they worked out a agreement that she would serve 20 years in prison, which the federal judge at sentencing said, although I am bound by this sentence, thought it was extremely unreasonable and too low for the nature of her involvement, and because she came to sentencing expressing no remorse or concern, so that was kind of the first step in it, and then ultimately the prosecution itself extended for many, many months. Some of the, and it was an emotional, difficult process. One of my law partners was actually, many years before, was the law clerk for, the judge that was involved in the case. And, it was just a very difficult thing for the court staff and for the judge, for the jury, and for everybody that happened to observe the facts as they would unfold daily in the newspaper.
Out of this case, a new law originated called Talia's Law. What does that law say? Who sponsored it? You were, and your law firm, directly responsible for giving it impetus, right?
Right. Well, we, as we approached this case, we kept on asking ourselves, why did this happen? And how can we prevent this from ever happening again? Because they were all relying on, kind of obscure federal regulations and footnotes and laws and other things which, they claimed exempted them from, any liability. And we came to the conclusion that the fact that they did not have to notify the state authorities, which was throughout the entire, federal government, was the thing that was the one thing that would have really saved this child's life. So we approached our congressional delegation, and who, of course, were quite aware of this dramatic case that was unfolding in Honolulu, and this was in 2016, in the last part of the
11 years after she died.
And this was, and it was as you recall, during the last part of the Obama administration, which he literally could not, get Congress to agree on anything. No, federal judges charges were affirmed, no new legislation. It was in the heart of the, political stalemate that was going on at the end of his administration. Yet when this law came to the floor of the Congress, it had tremendous support. It was something that wasn't going to cost anything. It was just a new standard by saying that if you have information with regard to child abuse that happens on a military base or by a military official, that in addition to all the things you're obligated to do, that you also have to inform the state authorities. And that law was called Talia's Law in her honor. And President Obama, who, as you know, was originally from Honolulu and would come out here for most Christmas vacations, signed the law here in Honolulu as one of his last acts in December of 2016, just a few weeks before he went out of office. And the thing about it was that we felt that it was important to turn and to attach Talia's name to it, because her name was becoming, infamous for being the victim of a horrible, horrible crime. And suddenly her name has become synonymous with a fix, a solution to that might very well protect other children in similar situations from the harm and the protection that would otherwise be provided by the state.
Right. So this brings up a term that many people haven't heard before. You mentioned it earlier, mandated reporters. What does that mean?
So typically there's a law that says that if you're a certain category of person, which includes people that are working with children, such as a priest or a minister or a teacher or a physician or an emergency room doctor or a nurse, and you have evidence that their child is abused, then you're obligated by law to report it, even if you're uncertain whether or not it was actually abuse or there was just an accident that inflicted an injury on a child. And that mandatory reporting requirements then gets this information into the bureaucracy of the state, so that so that they can investigate it, so that they can, be sensitive to repeated attempts. And all of this comes up in a database, which will allow the state instantly to jump in and do what's necessary to protect the child from future abuse.
What happens if a mandated reporter doesn't report this?
It is a violation of their obligations. We contend that that establishes a standard for their own liability when they fail to do that. There are not criminal laws sanctioned to it, so you don't go to jail if you don't report, but you certainly might very well be held liable for damage that has been caused by your failure to comply.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned earlier in this show, your objective as a very good trial lawyer is not only to successfully prosecute and win cases, but to make changes. And as a result of Talia's Law, hopefully other children are better protected in that gap between the military and civilian, where they have to be reported, the children can be rescued.
Right. I think that's one of the really takeaways, from this case for me. You can always sue people to get money to compensate them, but you can't always, in every case, take some action that might have a systemic impact that might protect children like Talia from ever being treated as she was.
You're a very prominent law firm, well known. You get a lot of people contact you to represent them. How do you select the clients that you end up taking?
That's a very good question. Sometimes we hear cases that just break our heart, and we become emotionally attached and kind of dedicated to responding to their circumstances. Other times we feel that there's something so fundamentally wrong in the system or by a particular wrongdoer, whether it's a dangerous product or a physician that has been a serial medical malpractice defendant, or other causes that we think that in addition to working on a case that may have life-changing things for our client by providing them the medical and rehabilitation things that they may ultimately need that money can provide, we also are very conscious of the fact that how is it that the case that we do might very well change the conduct of the future and provide some degree of safety and protection for others in similar situations.
I want to thank you for being on the show. Congratulations on winning the case.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.